Louis Armstrong was born the illegitimate son of William Armstrong and Mary Albert, also known as May Ann. And he was born on July 5th of 1901. However, all his life, he thought he was born on July 4th of 1900. And what could be more fitting for a great 20th century American jazz hero, Louis Armstrong. As I said, Louis Armstrong was born July 5th of 1901, and he was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. But 6 months after he was born, his father left the family, and he went to live with his grandmother. And she lived in the roughest, toughest part of New Orleans, that was Storyville. And in Storyville, within a 4-block radius of where Louis Armstrong was, there were 24 different houses of ill repute, speakeasies, and bars. And every one of them employed jazz musicians. And young Louis had a little singing group, a little 3-part singing group, and he would sing right outside the doorways for these brothels. And he would sing for the passerbys, the patrons who would throw out nickels and pennies. And he would listen to the jazz musicians, all of those musicians. And he would listen to the clarinet players, the banjos, the pianists, the bass players, the drummers. But he most could identify with the sounds of the cornet players. And at this time in New Orleans, the world's greatest cornet players were there playing jazz. Bunk Johnson, who had a beautiful, clear tone. They said you can actually hear him on a clear night 1.5 miles away when he was wailing loud. Joe Oliver, who had won so many cutting contests, when the brothels would advertise, they would put the bands on the back of flatbed trucks, and they would ride through the town of New Orleans to drum up business. And when the two carts of two competing brothels met in a street, they had a blowing contest, and whoever was the highest, the best, the fastest would win the contest. And Joe Oliver won so many contests that he earned the moniker King. So he was known from King Oliver from then on. And young Lewis, listening to King Oliver, that was his hero. He loved King Oliver. He followed around King Oliver anytime there was a marching band or anything. And anytime he wanted to rest, he would hold King Oliver's horn and kind of toot on it. But in 1911, young Lewis stole a pistol from his father's bureau, and at 12 midnight on New Year's Eve, he shot it off to scare away the evil spirits from a new year. This was just as illegal then as it is now. And young Lewis did it right in front of a policeman who just reached out his hand and grabbed him by the shoulder and took him to jail. The judge, realizing that young Lewis needed some discipline, sent him to the colored waifs home. There, Captain Joseph noticed that young Lewis had a lot of musical talent and put him in the brass band. He started out by playing tambourine, bass drum, and bugle, and pretty soon he was playing cornet. Within a year and a half of being in that band, Lewis was the leader of the brass band for the colored waifs home. It was a very proud moment. He talks about it in his autobiographies, how proud it was to not only be a jazz musician, but the leader of a band. And when he got out of the colored waifs home in 1914, he looked up his mentor, his hero, Joe Oliver. And Joe Oliver traded young Louis Armstrong doing odd jobs around the house, giving him cornet lessons. And pretty soon, young Louis was so good that when Joe Oliver needed to take a night off, he would get Louis Armstrong to take his place. And in 1917, when Joe Oliver left New Orleans, young Louis Armstrong took his place in New Orleans' hottest jazz band. That's Kid Ory's Creole Jazz Band. And we're going to play a couple songs from New Orleans tradition for you right now. And that is, anytime there's a gathering of people in New Orleans, you got to have a brass band. And when you have the brass band, anybody in the neighborhood, as you're marching through the neighborhoods, and anybody hearing this music is more than welcome and invited to come up and strut their stuff and stroll with their parasols or wave their handkerchiefs, and that's known as the second line. So here's two from the New Orleans second line tradition, and this is John Gillick playing that New Orleans second line big four drum beat. Let's listen to John for a second. Coming down the street, everybody get alive to do that second line. Young and old, you see, will dance in the street. Everybody get in line to do that second line. sing-along dancers. Yeah, looking good. Yeah, there's nothing more sexy than having a couple dance at 10:30 in the morning. Well, Joe Oliver left New Orleans in 1917 for one reason. That was because the Navy Department closed down Storyville for corrupting the morals of young sailors. Now, Storyville, that's where all the brothels were, and they employed jazz musicians to keep their patrons happy while they were waiting to get happy, I guess. So with the closing of all these brothels, there was no work for jazz musicians in New Orleans. And Joe Oliver left for Chicago in 1917, and pretty soon, Louis Armstrong left the city that he loved, that he knew as home for his whole life. And that was in 1919. He left and joined the Fate Marable Band, who was playing on the Streckfus Riverboat steam lines. Now, Fate Marable Band went up and down and played on the riverboats from New Orleans all the way up into Davenport, Iowa, and traveling and doing excursions. And that's where Louis Armstrong really honed his craft of reading music. A lot of people thought that Louis Armstrong couldn't read music. That's not true. He read music when he was in New Orleans and got a lot of gigs to do it that and play as such. But he really honed his craft in the Fate Marable Band. And that's the first time we hear about Louis Armstrong coming to St. Louis, was on the riverboat Sydney in 1919. And he came up and had a little bit of time off and went to the Grand Hotel. And that is no longer there. That's where the St. Louis Arch is. And they tore that down to make the room for the arch. But during his time there, everybody went crazy over this good-looking, handsome man from New Orleans. And Louis Armstrong went head over heels for a jazz musician that he heard in St. Louis by the name of Charles Creth. Now, Charles Creth was a very handsome man and very sharp dresser and had a wonderful sound on the cornet and had great bands. Matter of fact, he had 3 different bands with the same name, Charles Creth and the New Jazzomaniacs. And he would go from job to job to job on a Friday and Saturday nights, playing all 3 parts of that thing to keep 3 bands going. And there's a legend that is connected with Charles Creth. It is said that he actually stopped a knife fight by playing a single note on the cornet. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work with his great-grandson. And I asked him about this, and he said it's absolutely true. One night, they were at a band, and there was a dance, and 2 men got in a fight over a woman, drew knives. Charles Creth played a high C on his cornet, and that's when the bouncer and the nightclub owner hit these guys over the heads, knocking them out. And I also found out that Charles Creth went home with a woman because that ended up being his great-great-grandmother. So apparently love, clubs, and a high C conquers all. So we're going to do a song that Louis Armstrong heard Charles Creth play, and he went on to record it 26 times in his career. It is the most recorded jazz song in history. And when you talk about St. Louis, it is the town of St. Louis. But when you talk about the blues, it's the St. Louis Blues. Thank you so much. St. Louis Blues. 1921, Louis Armstrong got a telegram from his mentor, his friend, Joe Oliver, who was up in Chicago, and said, Louis, come up to Chicago and join my band. And Louis did. And he got up there, but his train was late pulling into Chicago. It must have been a United train. And pulled into Chicago and took a cab to the club. And when he got to the club, he opened up the front door, and he heard a sound like he had never heard before. Because there was a powerful, powerful jazz band, swinging powerful jazz band. And Louis Armstrong just stood there and thought to himself, how am I going to be able to play with this man, let alone add to it or just, be a part of it? And Joe Oliver spotted young Louis, silhouetted in the doorway, motioned him up on stage, and they started to play together. And Louis fell right in because this was his hero. He had taken lessons from this man for 5 years, and every day playing with him for 5 years. So he knew everything he was going to do. And they played beautifully together. And Chicago was just blown away by that powerful two-cornet front line. We're going to do a song, and this is from OK Records. This is the first available recording that you can hear Louis Armstrong playing on, and it is Joe Oliver's The Dipper-Mouth Blues. And right now, we're going to have Tom Tucker play the part of Joe Oliver, and I'm going to play the part of Louis Armstrong. Listen to those really tight two-part harmonies. They played together like a unit, and this changed the way jazz plays. But from this moment on, let's refer to Tom Tucker as King Tuck. Yeah. One, two, one, All right, let's talk about a couple things right here. First off, Louis Armstrong and that handkerchief. Oh, yes, indeed. Why did Louis Armstrong play with a handkerchief? Well, two reasons. First is, in New Orleans, there's been a tradition amongst cornet players that you don't want to give any tips to your competitors. So people like Bunk Johnson and a lot of the cornetists from down south, what they would do is they take a handkerchief and they drape it over their valve section. So you couldn't see what they were playing and how they were doing those notes. And the second reason Louis Armstrong played it, that's because the New Orleans tradition, is that he sweated profusely and needed it to just constantly dab it. So he figured, oh, he just keep it in his hand. So it's right there. As a good idea. I think it's a good idea. So now you know the handkerchief. Secondly, Louis Armstrong played with a lot of mutes, and so did Joe Oliver. Joe Oliver, mute is basically anything that you put inside a trumpet bell, and it acts like a sound filter. This is a clear tone mute, and this was actually invented by Joe Oliver. And so here's the typical sound of a trumpet, well, mostly typical. Parquet. And this is with the solo tone. This is the sound of the 20s. Yep, and there it is. So there's a couple things right there from Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong and Joe Oliver were very good buddies, but the thing was, in that band there was something really unique, and that was Joe Oliver's Creole jazz band, and that was a piano player that was a woman by the name of Lil Hardin.
That's right, honey.
That's right. And Lil Hardin was a beautiful, classically educated, valedictorian of her college class pianist that, had an attitude and also could swing a mean four on the piano. And Louis Armstrong, he met this woman and he was head over heels in love. And she wanted nothing to do with that big hit for New Orleans. But pretty soon, within a year, they were married. And I feel that, honestly, that without her pushing, support, whatever you want to call it, we would just know Louis Armstrong as a 1920s cornetist. But she didn't want to be married to any second cornetist in a jazz band. She thought Louis Armstrong should be a soloist or have his own band in his own right. Also, that she arranged for Louis Armstrong to take classical music lessons. She arranged for Louis Armstrong to meet all the important people in Chicago, and she also wrote music for him and different stuff. Here's a song that she wrote and didn't even get credit for it until shortly before her death in 1971. Here is Strutting with Some Barbecue. And by the way, barbecue is slang for a beautiful woman with long legs and tasty ribs. Here's King Tut.
They never change.
Just like the old days.
That's the day. So a few years, actually just about a year and a half again, after he was in the Creole Jazz Band, Louis Armstrong left for his greener pastures with the help and support and prodding of Lil Hardin, and that was, he left for New York City, joining one of the hottest jazz bands that were, the black jazz bands that was going up and down playing society. That was Fletcher Henderson's jazz band. Now Fletcher Henderson was playing for mixed audiences all the way up and down the East Coast, and Fletcher Henderson, along with Paul Whiteman at the time, realized that their very sophisticated audiences were getting bored with their arrangements. And by plugging in New Orleans jazz musicians who had a tradition of interweaving and making up their own parts, they could actually play the same arrangements and add these guys to their band and end up with new arrangements, and exciting ones at that. And pretty soon, their writers were writing music for these New Orleans jazz musicians that were coming in. Fletcher Henderson had the young Louis Armstrong, and Paul Whiteman had Frankie Trumbar and Big Spiderbeck, and these are some of the great recordings. Well, Louis Armstrong was in Fletcher Henderson's band for about a year and a half in New York. And he left that band because every time that they would do a recording, Fletcher Henderson would do a recording, they would hire a singer to come into the recording. And a lot of times not even rehearse, they just have the singer sing the part. And Louis Armstrong just couldn't believe it because he thought he had a beautiful singing voice and couldn't understand why Fletcher wouldn't let him sing. So after about a year and a half, he left and went back to Chicago where Lil Hardin had a band waiting for him. And it was Lil Hardin's Dreamland Syncopators, playing at the Dreamland Ballroom. And he was playing for $260 a week at that time, Dreamland Ballroom. Now you could buy a Model T Ford Roadster for $264, brand new. So he was making a car a week in pay. And when he came back, there was a huge banner over the entranceway of the Dreamland Ballroom and said, Lil Hardin's Dreamland Syncopators featuring the world's greatest cornetist, Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong looked at it and said, no, the world's greatest cornetist is Joe Oliver, King Oliver. He's my mentor and my friend. I don't want that. And besides, when he went to New York to play with Fletcher Henderson's band, Fletcher made him change from cornet to trumpet. And trumpet allowed Louis Armstrong to play the notes and the sound that he had heard in his head. So from 1925 on, he played trumpet. And but when he came back to Chicago, OK Records, which had been recorded him with King Oliver, said, we want to record you. And this is where Louis Armstrong changed jazz. And he said, I'll do it under two stipulations. First of all, I get to have complete control over the musicians that I record with. Second, I get to pick all the material. I am completely the one that does the material. And they said, okay. And they allowed this, and this is where we get the greatest jazz of that time. We're talking about the Hot 5 and the Hot 7 recordings of Louis Armstrong with OK Records. We're going to skip ahead and do a Hot 7 recording. And many people believe that Louis Armstrong's recording of this song is the single greatest recording of all history. Be it classical, jazz, rock and roll, anything. It is the single greatest recording. And it certainly is from the master. Here is our tribute to the West End Blues. As the day, Louis Armstrong became one of the most successful and highest paid jazz musicians of the 30s. By 1933, he was making $8,000 a performance. One of the highest paid entertainers in the world, Louis Armstrong, from his humble beginnings in New Orleans in the Hollywood. But by 1946, critics charged his big band with being just too commercial. And so longtime manager Joe Glazer formed the All-Stars, featuring Louis Armstrong's roots music and the vocalists Velma Middleton, Sid Catlett, Arvell Shaw, and the incomparable Jack Teagar.
Gonna fill my lungs with lots of air. Grateful is the Armstrong in rocking chair. Fetch me some water.
You know what ain't water, you want papa.
Lord, I see in your eyes.
My heart's already dead.
You can't get from this gap.
What can we jumping papa?
I ain't going nowhere.
You ain't going nowhere, no.
Cause sitting here grabbing.
Grab it,
Grab it. The flies round this old rocking chair.
show us bottles, baby. Get it.
Got it.
Good.
You remember old Aunt Harriet?
I remember all that area.
Well, how long up in heaven she'd be?
Oh, about a year and a half, Daddy.
Sitting down in sweet cherry.
Oh, Jerry.
At the end of my troubles, I see.
Ah, sweet Sherry.
Rocking chair gets a
Rock chair gets a gas.
judgment day's coming upon me.
That rock chair's gas.
Chained to my old rocking chair.
Well, now, don't you stop that
take Louis, I'm just too whooped.
Yeah!
Paul Reed.
Thank you.
We're going to skip a little bit ahead because of time constraints, but on November of 1963, Louis Armstrong went into the recording studio and recorded 28 different songs for Cat Records. And most of the time he just played it once or twice at the most, these songs. And then from that recording session, he went on the road and was playing in the Bahamas. Well, by April 14th of 1964, one of those songs that he recorded became the #1 song on the hit parade. It knocked the Beatles, which had exclusively occupied the #1 spot for over a year and a half continuously, out of first place. The New York Times estimated that on radio stations across the United States alone, this song was being played 10,000 times a day. In Times Square, there were loudspeakers playing this song 24 hours a day. And then in the Bahamas, Louis Armstrong couldn't figure out what people were yelling at him for when he wouldn't do this song. And the band and he scoured the entire islands looking for sheet music of this, couldn't find it, had to have it airlifted in so they could relearn the song to play it in New York City. And I can think of no better person to play this than Paul Reed.
Stop it! I had that when you've been gone. You're looking swell. Darling, I can tell. Mama, don't know. Oh, yeah. You're looking
When it's sleepy time down south has been Louis Armstrong's theme song since he first recorded it in 1935. Duke Ellington said of Louis Armstrong, he's a truly good and original man. He inspired thousands of people, enchanted millions of friends, inspired thousands of trumpeters. To me, a truly good and original man. After years of heart trouble, Louis Armstrong passed away just shortly after celebrating his 71st birthday on July 6th of 1971. It's hard to say what Louis Armstrong means to us. The great trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie said, he is the creator of our language on the trumpet. He is everything unto himself. No sentences, no words. Just the name is enough. Louis Armstrong. I see fields green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed day, and the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. All the colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, shine also in the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying how do you do. They're really saying I love you. I hear babies cry. Oh, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, yes, what a wonderful world. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed our tribute to Louis Armstrong. Again, this entire tribute, as well as many other tunes, are available on our CD to St. Louis Armstrong. At this time, how about a very big hand for all the volunteers and everybody doing this festival also. Great long live this fabulous festival. And thank you very much. Take a slave for High Sierra Jazz Band coming out on this very stage coming up next. And don't forget our next show at 1 o'clock. Oh yes. Until then, God willing and freedom rise. We'll see you over there. Thank you very much. Louis Armstrong.